Hi, I'm Lew Stringer. I've been working in comics since 1983 professionally. I do humour stuff. I write and draw humour comics for things like the Beano. I've worked for Viz, the Dandy, Buster, Oink comic, and I currently do a little mini strip in Doctor Who magazine every month. So I'm a freelancer, so I've worked for various publishers. I always wanted to work in comics when I was a little kid. I mean, I've always been interested in comics and the history of comics since I was a child. And I sort of put it on the back burner when I left school because I grew up in Nuneaton, which is a fairly industrial town, and I didn't think it was practical to want to do this. So I sort of put it onto one side, did an ordinary job working in an office, and didn't really enjoy that. So then I thought, no, I'll rekindle that ambition. So I did. I quit the job, worked back, strived to become a cartoonist again, and it eventually paid off in, say, 1983 when I started selling my first stuff to Marvel Comics, and then it went on from there. I first felt that I was a professional when I sold my first work, because I'd done fanzines and small press comics in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and then I sold my first cartoon to Marvel UK in 1983, which was just a one-off cartoon. What if Iron Man lived up to his name? He's a steam iron with legs, and that led to doing one of those every month, and then on to strips. And I thought, I'm sort of, I'm earning money now, and eventually at the time I was on the dole, so I couldn't call myself professional then really, but then that led to more work, so I signed off, and since the '84 when I sort of went professional, and I've been doing it ever since. The strip I've enjoyed most is Combat Colin, which I did for Marvel UK back in 1987. It started off as a strip in Action Force comic, and then moved to Transformers comic in the back as a humour relief to the adventure stuff that was in there. And that's basically, Combat Colin is a sort of a freelance adventurer who just lives in suburbia, and he thinks he's a war hero, but he's not really. He's a bit of a bumbler. But he eventually becomes a hero, and with that I could do serials. I could do 6-part serials and things like that. So comedy adventure stuff, and he's fighting mad scientists and monsters and robots and things like that. And it gave me a lot of scope, and I was writing and drawing it, and I really enjoyed it. I think the creator I most admire was Leo Baxendale, who created the Bash Street Kids and Minnie the Minx in the 1950s. And then when I first saw his work in the 1960s, he was working on a comic called Wham. And his stuff was just insanely funny, and his style just set a stylistic look for comics all through the 1960s, really. And he's had lots of imitators and people like that, But his stuff was generally funny. And Leo Baxendale, and also I should mention Ken Reid. I think equally, I like both of them. Ken Reid he sort of did grotesque sort of humour strips, really outrageous stuff. He created a character called Frankenstein. He did Queen of the Seas about this boat that kept sinking all the time. Face Ache for Buster, about a guy who could change his features into a monster, things like that. Fantastic artist, check out Ken Reid's work, it's excellent. I'm kind of used to working on my own, although I have worked with other writers. I don't really have any ambitions to work with anybody else, but if a good script comes along with a good writer, I'm happy to work with them. I did a strip with Dave Gibbons years ago. He wrote a story called The Glut for a collection called The Seven Deadly Sins that Knockabout published. So to work with Dave was fantastic, the co-creator of Watchmen. And recently I did a thing with John Freeman, did some strips with John Freeman for the Core Buster special that Rebellion published. And I've got coming up in October is the Monster Fun special, which I've revived Wiz War, which was an old 60s strip. And me and the writer Keck W, who's a 2000 AD writer, have come up with this new spin on those characters. So I don't really yeah, I don't really have any ambitions to work with anybody, but if the right script comes along, I'm happy to work with someone. But I prefer to write my own material, really, The creative process I have is a bit disorganised, probably. Usually it's sort of roughing out ideas and then, doing drafts and then sort of getting that sort of sorted out. I always send off a script to the editors first, even though I might be drawing my own material. I'll send off the script for approval and a full script, and then they sometimes make changes or sometimes just say yes, that's fine, and then it comes to drawing it. I still draw traditionally, so I'm still drawing on paper, pencil ink on paper, and then I scan it into Photoshop and colour it digitally. And also I can also make alterations then, in Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint. But yeah, I'm still drawing traditionally at the moment. Yeah, I think a lot of people these days everything's done digitally, so they'll draw on a Cintiq or something like that, or a graphics tablet. But because I've been sort of doing it this way for 40 years, I'm still used to drawing onto paper, and I just feel more comfortable doing that. But it's certainly the digital revolution has come in useful for colouring and also to make alterations. You might be able to scan something in and think, well, that character would be better moved a little bit, so you can alter it in Photoshop and things like that, or just flip it around to a different, horizontally or something like that. So it's nice to sort of be able to use both medium. I tend to sort of create my own characters, but it would be nice to sort of do some other people's stuff as well. I mean, the Bash Street Kids I've done already. There's lots of characters I've already done from that have been created by others. So I don't really have any ambition to sort of. There's nothing I can think of. But if it's offered to me, like for instance, I'm doing Biffo the Bear for next year's Beano annual. And I hadn't thought about it. I had no ambition to draw Biffo the Bear or anything like that. But once that was mentioned, I thought, oh, that's great, yeah, because I used to read his stuff when I was a kid. So it'd be great to do that character. So I don't really think about what character I'd like to do next. I'll just, see what comes along and take it as it comes, really. Giving advice to my younger self would be, I think, don't worry as much, because the thing is, when being a freelancer, the main problem is that you never know what's around the corner, and sometimes you think, oh, this is great, you're doing all these strips, but a comic can get cancelled, and then you're worrying. But usually something else comes along. So I try not to worry these days. But back in my 20s, if a comic was cancelled, I'd be panicking, I'd be fretting and wondering where the next penny's coming from. But usually, there's usually something you can find and to move on to. So I'd tell myself not to worry so much. Who's more valuable, artist or writer? Well, as an artist and writer, I'd say both. I don't think you can. I don't think you can vary it. I suppose a good artist could probably salvage a bad script, because you might look at the artwork and think, yeah, I'll buy it because of that. But a bad artist can damage a good script. But so I don't really. I see them as both equal, because I've always done both myself. I see it both as equal. That might sound a bit of a cop out, but that's the way I've always considered it. Marvel or DC. I've always been a Marvelite, to be honest. I mean, when I was a kid, the Marvel strips were reprinted in comics like Smash and Fantastic and comics like that. So I grew up reading those things. And at the time, Marvel were very much into this dismissing DC as inferior and things like that. So I sort of went along with that when I was 7 years old, thinking that DC comics were inferior. And I suppose there's still a bit of that in me, thinking, no, I still prefer the Marvel stuff. DC have too many revamps for my liking. You just start getting into a story, then there's a huge crossover, and then they relaunch, and I don't know, I just can't get into it. But if we were just buying it for the artist and things like that, then both really. DC have got some great people working for them at the moment, but so Marvel. So yeah, again, it's a bit of a cop out, but I both, I would say.